actually affirmatively take an action to break up the camp and kick people out, okay, then that's an affirmative state-created danger. So you want to set the conditions so we can push back with that. This is where we've had the most success in the last 7 years, is by fighting the city and pointing out to them that if you take this affirmative step, for example, in Salinas, California, where we first started organizing about 8 years ago, they passed a law that the police department could come and take anything that a person had on the sidewalk or in some other public space and take it and destroy it immediately if it was broken, dirty, or in disrepair. And any cop could just come along and say, I think that's dirty, I'm destroying it. Or some city employee could come along and say, oh, I see that that's broken, so I'm going to take and destroy it immediately. So we challenged that, and we pointed out that if you have a person and they have a little sleeping bag and they got a tent and they got a tarp and they got some kind of way to cook a little food for themselves, some little propane thing, and you take those things because they're broken, dirty, or disrepair, you have now put them in an increased risk of harm because you've taken away necessities. You've taken away things that people need to survive. And they repealed that ordinance, and we won that battle in Salinas 7 years ago, because we proved you're taking people from a place of relative safety and you're going to push them into a place of danger. And that's what we told the court just recently with the heat. We said if you take people who are under some trees, they're along, they have some kind of shade, they're under a freeway overpass, so there's some kind of protection from the heat and the sun. If you kick them out of there and push them onto the sidewalk where it's 124 degrees, you know what I'm trying to say? And by the time the evening comes, you have all that heat absorbed all day long. You have increased the risk of harm to them. And we convinced the court that Sacramento was creating a danger. It was a state-created danger. And that's how we got the preliminary injunction, to tell them you cannot sweep, at least during this heat wave. All right? So we're learning. Same with COVID. That's how we got the preliminary injunctions during COVID. And of course, the way we got it, the evidence was because Crystal and all you guys, Nikki, and people from the Sac Soup Coalition went out and got the evidence, got the declarations, got people like yourselves to write down on a piece of paper, this is what will happen to me if you break up this camp. This is what will happen to me if you move me from this place into the street. This is what will happen to me if you take my possessions. This is the danger. This is the increased harm that you will cause if you perform these affirmative acts. That's the legal standard. Can we show that they're going to increase the risk of harm? You see what I'm saying? So the more you can make this place a relative place of safety, food, you're cooking, you're providing things, you're organizing yourselves, all right? The more difficult it will become for them to come in and break it up. Because I understand that you guys are trying to secure this place, not just take it, but actually kind of lock it down, fortify it, making a place that's very difficult for them to break up. All right, the other thing I want to tell you is that there are you have First Amendment rights. Now, I love one of the things about this camp is all this art, and all these posters. I took pictures of every one of it, of all of the posters, beautiful portraits of some of our heroes, signs, and by putting up those signs saying housing is a right, home houses, not hate, everything that's up here, homeless people need housing, not hate. Those are messages. That's free speech. That's a political message. And so we are able to say, wait a minute, this is not just a camp of necessity, of survival, it's a protest camp. It's a protest camp. And it's a protest camp in two ways. The first way is a message, an explicit message. All right, so I'm going to write this down. This is the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and the state constitution. Okay? Political speech. And these posters are political speech. So if they come through here and they break up what's essentially a political camp, a protest camp, they're violating everybody's First Amendment rights. And that becomes important because most courts will look at that and say, wait a minute, hold everything. By breaking up the camp, you either have the purpose or the effect of depriving these people of their constitutional right to protest. That's an explicit political speech message. But there's another one, and that's implied. Now let me explain.
Is there any precedent of how we have held in that way?
Yeah, I'm going to touch on that right now. So, if I say there were no signs, say there was no art, say there was no protest words here, like there are here, let's eliminate all of it. Would you guys still have a message here? Who thinks there would still be a message?
There is.
What would be the message?
That we're still a community.
Still a community? What else
They
would be the
promised us
message?
something and we want to go through with it.
Say that again?
They promised us something and we just want them to go through with it.
Okay, so you're holding them to their word.
Yes.
What else do you think is the message, even without all the signs?
Well,
We're still here. We're
What's
still
that?
people.
What'd you say?
I said, so how do I get my 40 acres a mule?
What?
We're still here. We're
Okay,
still
that's the
people.
point right there.
They
I don't
want
know
us
40
to
acres.
die.
I don't know about 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
But the message here is there is homelessness. There is
Yeah.
not adequate housing for people in the city of Sacramento. The very fact that there's tents up and down the streets, camps up and down the streets, along the rivers, along the tracks, that carries a message even if you don't open your mouth and say a word. And the message is there is not enough housing. Now, you asked about whether there's actually a legal case around this. Yes, there is. Now, you guys know that we work very closely with Food Not Bombs. I don't know how active Food Not Bombs is here in Sacramento, but they're very active in a lot
Every
of other
Sunday.
cities. What's that?
Every Sunday, Chavez Park, like 15.
There you go.
Yeah.
Now, Food Not Bombs has 400 chapters across the country, and they are actually part of the Homeless Union. Their national founder, Keith McHenry, is part of our executive board for the National Union of the Homeless, and he's also with the Santa Cruz Homeless Union. They had a case in Florida about almost 10 years ago. I think it was part of that. That was feeding, but it's the same point. Okay, you're right. So you know about that case. In that case, what happened was Food Not Bombs was just providing food like they always do, right? They're feeding people. Now, Food Not Bombs has a message. When they say food not bombs, they're saying take all that money that's going to war and the military and use it instead to feed people. That's a message. But the court said
Hello.
even if it wasn't called Food Not Bombs, even if they had no message,
Pretty good.
the very fact that people
I'm
are
at
feeding
a
people in
meeting
a
over here
public
right
park
now.
shows there's hunger in America. And so
Anthony.
that carries the message. You can carry a message even without opening your mouth and saying any words. If I
Sure.
shake my fist, that's
Sure.
at someone. That's a message without any
Sure.
words.
You know,
I'm
So,
mad, I'm
are
angry,
you still
I'm
in?
clapping one, all right? And if you see tents, and if you see people homeless on the streets, and if you see people, trying to gather as best they can under any kind of protection they can find, the message is this is a city where there's inadequate housing for poor people. All right? So you already carry two types of messages in this camp right now. An express political
I've got a
message.
hand up.
You got your hand up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's funny that you were saying the word bombs. The reason why I say this is because there was actually people that were literally throwing bombs at us when they were driving down the road. And they did finally catch the ones that finally did it down the street. Well, they had them in jail for a minute, and then they released them just so that they could come and tell us all we had to leave. Because, as long as there was an open case going on over around here, they couldn't move none of us because it was removing police evidence. They couldn't make none of us leave because the case was open. So they released the people that were doing it just so that they could come and make us all move.
You know what? I would say that's a state. I would say that's a state-created danger.
Yeah.
Even though it was a private party.
Well, we had the evidence. We had the bombs. We gave them to them.
Okay.
Well, we kept one of them, but
Well, here's what I mean. That's a good point. Even if it was a private party, a private individual that did the bombing, okay, and then they get arrested for it, and then they post bail and they're released.
No, they
okay?
just released them.
The very fact that they released someone that they knew, more likely than not, had committed violence, they released them. Didn't that increase the risk of harm to you?
Yes, it did.
By letting a known
Yes, it
bomber,
did.
a known, anti-homeless
Yes, it did.
terrorist out? Now that person might have a right to post bail, but then the state should have taken affirmative actions to
They
make
didn't.
sure.
They didn't post bail. They just dropped it. They didn't post bail. They didn't post bail. The city
They just
dropped
let 'em
the
out.
Yeah, they just dropped the
Okay,
case.
well, that's
They-
even that makes
They dropped it. They
that
dropped
makes
everything
it
on them and
that
let
makes
them
it
go.
even stronger. Do you guys know that an individual police officer can issue a restraining order on the spot? They can issue a restraining order on the spot. They can say, okay, and it's temporary. There will be a hearing on the restraining order, but a police-ordered restraining order takes effect immediately. And that's what they could have done with that guy.
Well, my niece
right?
is
But they didn't do any of
quadriplegic,
that.
and one of them
did
went
they?
inside her tent.
Okay,
She
so-
can't move or nothing, and it blew up her TV, and they still let him go. Knowing
Okay.
that she
Could've
can't
blew
move,
her
she's
up.
quadriplegic. There's nothing she can do. And one of them went inside her tent and blew up her TV. It could have blew her up, and she can't move, she can't do nothing,
Right.
and they still released her.
Now that's
That's a
another
hate
that's
crime.
another thing. Not only does this camp, in my opinion, have a legal right to exist, you guys have a legal right to be protected.
That's
the city
right.
cannot deny you the normal public protection measures that they give to everybody else.
But
They're
they
supposed
do.
to give to everybody else. But they routinely do. We know this. We know that if you call the police about some situation and they think you're homeless or calling from an area, say, well, we don't care about them. We don't have an obligation to protect them, right? And so, but they do have that obligation. And the fact that they don't carry it out, I'll tell you something else.
Their job is to
The city
protect
has
and serve.
obligations for sanitation. They have obligations to provide water. They have all these. They already have these obligations under the California Health and Safety Code. Now that's just words on paper. You guys are the ones that need to put teeth into those laws. You know what I'm saying? A right doesn't mean anything unless you actually
I
exercise.
mean, isn't that their job, to
Organized.
protect and serve? Isn't that their job?
What's that?
Isn't that their job, is to protect and serve?
Well, that's right.
Just words on the
We know who they're really protecting. The
They're not
don't.
protecting us, but they're serving us all with get out notices and everything else.
protect property.
Pocket all that
Okay.
money out.
The other thing I want to suggest that you guys give a lot of thought to is you need to do organized outreach. You know, and I know you're already doing it to the broader community. And I'll give you an example. And sometimes that outreach has to be kind of tough. It's not just support us. It's you need to defend us for the very reasons that you yourself state. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I said before we got involved with the homeless union when they were closing all the mills. At that time, the church in Pittsburgh, California, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania rather, was the headquarters for U.S. Steel. So what we did, when I say we, steelworker union people in Pittsburgh, went into the churches, because the churches were doing nothing for the homeless. And yet all the U.S. Steel executives went to this one particular church in downtown Pittsburgh. And so, you know, they worship the homeless guy on Sunday, right? Jesus Christ.
Right.
And then they step over the homeless guy on Monday.
Right.
You know what I'm trying to say? Or make someone homeless on Monday. So we called attention. It was an alliance between certain ministers who were on our side and the unemployed steel workers. And they went into the churches. First they approached the church and said, you need to support us. We're trying to save this valley. We're trying to stop them from closing the mills. If they're not going to operate, if U.S. Steel doesn't want to operate the mill, then we should operate as a public utility so we can keep on working and making steel, you know, for what the country needs, right? But the churches would not support because the churches back there were controlled pretty much by the big money, right?
Right.
So what they did is they walked right into the services. They would walk into the church and say, "We came to you for help, and you ignored us. Well, we're here to tell you that don't talk about the Bible. Don't talk to us about the least of me. No, they talk about I am the least for you. That's what I am. In other words, the whole gospel is that we're about the people who have the least, right?
Right.
And if you're going to preach that, then you got to have to practice that. And then so the church was confronted with a crisis because here were homeless people and union people saying, "We call you out on your own religious beliefs. We say you're not putting them into practice.
Right,
We're
you're
not going to let
telling
you.
us, yeah.
We're not going to let you close our jobs down, put us in the street, and then go to church and pretend that you're obeying the precepts of your faith because you're not." And that had a big effect. And the churches had to line up on one side or another. Okay. Now I'm not saying to do that necessarily here in Sacramento, but what I am saying, and I know there's church groups that are on your side, and that's very important. Okay. But on the other hand, the church as an institution, where are they? We got to call them out, and we got to call the unions out as an institution. Now we're working with some of the workplace unions, all right. But most of these unions are not really. They don't understand. Their own members are becoming homeless. You know what I'm trying to say? They're not actively engaged in this fight, okay? And they need to become actively engaged in the fight. So I think we need to give some thought to taking a little bit more radical, a little bit more forceful measures to call people out on what their obligation is.
Well, that's what I think. I personally, I don't know about how anybody else feels, but I feel that that's what we're doing here is we're calling them out on that because they came in for a week because somebody said they were doing their job. So they come out here for a week, put the sunshine up everybody's
That's just token then. The difference is what you guys organized during COVID with the encampment medical team, the nursing students, the medical students from Davis and from California North State Medical School, and that went on almost for the entire duration of COVID-19. But that was the exception.
When the shelters open, they do the same thing.
Right.
It's just playing over and over and over and over again. I have the housing voucher that I got from the shelter, and that was like in 2017. I still have it. I can't tell you how many places to live in, and the county screws me every time. I've gone through literally 17 case managers, and I've met one of them.
All right. Well, what I'm saying here is that we need to develop a lot more support. And I know that it's hard to do, but we're going to have to take the message out, and in some cases that message has to be forceful. How many of you were there at the California League of Cities last year, a year and a half ago? You know what happened with us, right? We went out in front of the California League of Cities meeting over there at the Sheraton, and we set up a thing, and it was a homeless conference, a homeless workshop, and they were charging $100 to get in. Well, how many people are going to be able to pay $100 to get into the homeless workshop? And it was put on by the California League of Cities. They represent police departments, they represent city managers, city attorneys, city council members, the cities and counties up and down the state of California, right? California League of Cities. And they had, 300-400 people there? And so then we asked them politely, we said, look, this is a homeless workshop, a homeless conference. We would like to say a few words. This is the homeless union. Crystal and Betty and Dante and some of the others were all out there saying, we are the homeless community. You're going to have this conference? We'd like to say a few words. And they said no. All right, so we engineered our way into the thing anyway. And Crystal led the charge, and we went up on the stage. And what were they going to do? Kick homeless people out of a homeless conference? And say, well, you got 5 minutes. And instead, we took, half an hour? You talked for about 10 minutes. And there's this great photograph of Crystal up there like this and all these people. And after that happened, well, I'll tell you, Crystal, that changed things, didn't it? I mean, in terms of their attitude and what they expect now, what they're looking at?
They took the union a little more serious, as far as conversations both statewide and locally. We followed it up with statewide demands. But yeah, we're literally up against. We're literally at war with our government. The way that we feel about this is okay, we'll see you. We need to create our own camp self-sustainability. So what you were saying about your vouchers and things, I just sat on the statewide task force thing Nikki did too, and it was a fucking joke. I'll be real with it. It was a joke. With all of the entities at the table, there is no services, there is no housing. Let's be real about it. So I think that, again, talking about fortifying this camp, we need to bring in our own services. We have the medical team. We could say that we are bringing medical in. That doesn't mean that we sidescape things like the county behavioral health and things like that people want. Right. It's not what we're going to impose on people. It's what people want.
Right.
So if those kind of things are wanting to be connected, we can bring that to the camp. The street medical teams, those are amazing folks. They've been volunteers. Those are volunteers. Yeah. They're with us. But becounty behavioral health, things like that,
it's just the county themselves. Even my friend Gina, for instance, I'm just gonna throw it out there. But she also had a voucher, and her actual worker, her case worker, she had a place. The man held the place for her. He redid the entire apartment for her. Sent the county video of everything he redid the whole apartment. And her worker turned around and told him, "Well, we can't get out there right now, so go ahead. If you have to rent it to somebody else, go ahead and rent it to somebody else."
They're inspectors.
And she's like, "Well, wait a minute. You're supposed to be my worker here for me. Why are you telling them to just rent it out to somebody else?" Right. So it's not just the county themselves. That's what they're doing to us. They don't care about us.
That's where we intercept. That's where we can intercept. So if we had behavioral health here, we had the medical teams, we had all these things. Like Anthony's saying, if we fortify this camp, they can't say that the union or this camp, this group of folks, isn't getting the services. We have to I always say look for the gray areas. I work in that gray area because we know that's where they're going. Right. We want to make sure that they can't remove folks from this place. And as far as your vouchers and things, this is where we need to intercept, because I sit both in city and county on different boards, committees, and different things. It's a hot mess. I'll tell you right now, they're not there for the unhoused. It's us. If you don't know somebody, you're not moving forward with the system. It's just how it is.
Yeah, in fact, the only reason why I even got my voucher or got as far as I did with anything was because of my medical case manager at the time. She came to the shelter, met me one-on-one, and they just recently got rid of her. And she's
That's
somewhere
not
else now.
covered.
And so now she's not even my medical case anymore.
Right. So I think these are examples of what's happening on a daily basis, every day to individuals. And the idea of having a community like this is that all for one and one for all. You know, take some of these prime examples and hold them up for public scrutiny, and call people out who are responsible for doing these things. I'll give you an example. Some of you may have read that we had a battle in the city of Sausalito for the last 18 months. They had a lot of these people that were living on boats out there in Richardson Bay, and then over the last maybe a year and a half before the camp was established, they destroyed 90% of these people's boats. They call them the anchor outs. These are people who are sea captains, mariners, fisher people. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
People that lived on the boat, they come into the city to work, that type of thing. So they made them homeless. I mean, arguably, what they had was barely a home, but it was a home, living out on the boats. What they would do is say, well, that's debris, marine debris. Now they just want to clear out all these poor people who are on the waters, and so they can bring in the big yachts and bring in the big, pleasure craft and make it all for the rich and famous up and down the coast of the bay there, Richardson Bay. So what happened was, because they destroyed the boats, they formed an encampment at Dunphy Park. And then the police, they passed a measure saying, well, no camping in the park. So they physically resisted. When the police came, they were going to tear down the encampment. People stood up and fought the police, and the police had to back down, at least for that one day. The next day, we filed a lawsuit saying that the city has no right to tear down this camp because they're not offering any alternative indoor accommodations to anybody. And they're violating Martin versus Boise, and it's a state-created danger because they're pushing people out of where they're safe. I mean, they had meals, they had, same thing, medical care, they had religious services, which is another thing that's protected under the First Amendment.
Right.
Is